In our podcast, we explore the insights, strategies, and challenges that shape exceptional leadership. I'm your host, Rebecca Jenkins, joined with Callum Jenkins, and we're tackling a critical topic today: how we can redefine leadership for 2025, moving away from traditional approaches to a more collaborative and inclusive approach, and the generational differences in leadership expectations. So joining me today is Dr. Meera Branku. Meera is a leadership advisor, coaching and consulting psychologist with 20 years of experience and is CEO of TowerScope, where she helps technical experts transition into leadership roles. Meera is the author of Millennials Guide to Workplace Politics and the host of the Hard Skills podcast, where she unpacks the intersection of leadership, behavioral science, and organizational psychology. Meera is a licensed psychologist and has been widely recognized as a thought leader in leadership identity, gender dynamics in leadership, and high achievement psychology. Meera, a big welcome to you. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you guys.
Thank you very much.
Meera, great to have you on. Perhaps you could just kind of give us a quick introduction to a bit about your background and where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should say, I just love that the fact that we're on three different time zones, right? I'm in the US, Rebecca, you're in the UK, Callum, you're in Australia, I believe. Is that right?
I'm indeed.
So
Yeah, down in Sydney.
We're global here.
Definitely
So
global.
Yeah, a little bit about my background, how I got here. I was a school counselor first. That was my first career. And that wasn't like a great fit. And I went into clinical psychology, slightly better fit, but I went right into management and leadership roles within the Department of Veterans Affairs within the US. And from there, I really enjoyed just personally developing myself as a leader, developing my teams and learning how to do that, and developing lots of organizational outcomes and thinking about big picture goals. And through that, I had a lot of people coming to me, especially women, asking me how to navigate this large complex system, how to become more visible. From that, I started this company, TowerScope, and especially interested in helping other people navigate large complex systems, navigate thorny workplace politics, and also becoming visible and appreciating that there are lots and lots of folks with different styles, different work styles, different leadership styles that can be successful. And that's kind of why we're here today to talk about that.
Thank you. And when you said when you were at VA, you did a lot of that sort of big picture work, and then you had a few people that came up to you and sort of, especially women in leadership, and you supported them through that. Was there a particular moment that you defined to be sort of like a pivotal point in your career where you decided that this was, really what you wanted to do going forwards? Or was it the sort of build-up of multiple occasions over time?
I think there was a pivotal moment, and it seems kind of crazy to think about this as the pivotal moment because it was actually an incredibly stressful experience. But I had a stretch assignment to serve as an interim director of another large center of excellence. And this was incredibly early in my career. 3 years into being a psychologist, and they asked me to go specifically because it was called a toxic and hostile work environment. That's how they labeled it. And the senior leaders who were in these high level positions really did not want to go and tackle this. And my boss said, I think you have the raw materials to be able to manage this. I've seen what you can do with our center. And I went. And it was intense and it was really, really hard. And I learned probably more there than I ever did in my entire career. And I came back and I applied it and I learned how to help redevelop trust in an environment that had fallen apart, that had faced organizational trauma. I learned how to slow down and listen and care for the people who have been impacted and try to rebuild a center. And that's when I realized, wow, I think this is what I should be doing. I can see the impact and I'm enjoying myself, even though it's incredibly difficult. So I think that was the pivotal moment.
What? You labeled it as a hostile and toxic environment. What was that actually like?
It was very intense. People were paranoid that they were being watched and listened to. And, there were constant complaints, EEO complaints, investigations, fact finding. People were reporting things to the media. I was finding my name in the media when I was there. Everyone was pointing finger. No one trusted each other, and everyone was like submitting complaints left and right. And it was because, their trust had degraded so much. They were not willing to work with each other anymore. They were not willing to sort of sit down and discuss anything. So a lot of that came to that. And, there were signs like undermining, sabotaging, underground bullying, negative gossiping constantly. All of these things are signs of a negative, toxic, or hostile work environment.
I guess that's quite a good segue into the flip side of that, and maybe the main topic for today's conversation in terms of like redefining what does good leadership look like for 2025 and going forwards. Maybe the opposite of what you just described. But what do you sort of think make the kind of key themes of good leadership in today's workplace, Mira?
Yeah. So what's the flip? The flip is you feel psychological safety, which is, a term that describes feeling like you could speak up, number one, about any concerns or any ideas, and then feeling like it's worth it to speak up about any concerns and ideas because it will be taken in and people will be interested in what you have to say and there'll be follow-up. So all of that leads to innovation and creativity and people appreciating like just being able to chew on different ideas and not question whether it's a good or bad idea. So psychological safety is a big one. Another one is feeling like your team is working effectively, that your boss is listening to you and wants to create a safe, healthy, thriving environment where you can be able to do your very best work, that you're supported in being able to do your best work. That helps us lean in, that gets us engaged and motivated to come to work every single day, excited. And, feeling like everyone has your back and that you have other people's back. Like those are just some examples of what it feels like in an environment that's healthy. And, you can tell if you have highly effective teams, if you have people sharing lots of ideas, different ideas, it's going to have incredible business outcomes too. So it feels good and you're getting incredible outcomes that feels like you can have pride in the work that you're doing and the outcomes that you're producing.
I totally agree with all those things you said. And I think it's quite amazing how effective good leadership can be in terms of like how productive and effective you are at what you do.
Yeah.
Drawing on some of those themes that you mentioned, what do you think is the hardest trait for a leader to be good at into sort of today's workspace?
The hardest trait, I think what I'm finding now is listening. Well, I would couple it listening and empathy. And I mean, it's hard to pinpoint just one, but that would be it. And the reason is because we are all so stretched thin in terms of our attention span. And for, leaders are constantly battling like constant demands, small and big fires happening in the background that they feel like they need to attend to. And there's almost no room in their schedule where they could just sit down and reflect and think and be strategic and follow up. And so if they're in a meeting with people sharing lots of ideas, their mind is probably racing with a million other things that are happening in the background or pings on their phone and people interrupting them and stuff like that. And it's really, really hard to just attend for all of us, but especially for leaders, to just attend to what's happening in the room, what people are saying, what people are asking for, and then what is needed in the moment based on that. And being able to track that means being able to slow yourself down and, know when you're stressed out and you're not listening, know when you're feeling like this is not a priority. This is not important to me. I can't even pay attention to hear this, but then pretending like you are, and everybody can tell. So I think that's the greatest challenge.
And I would agree with you. I think you often see that where people don't necessarily listen. They might hear them, but they're not necessarily listening to what they're actually saying. What do you think is the best way? Let's say you are a leader in a business, small or large today, and you identify that you are struggling to do this with your team. What do you think is the best way that people can sort of overcome this and become better listeners?
I think it takes a lot of practice to be able to shut down everything else that's happening in your mind. And to just attend to what's happening in the moment. And there's lots and lots of tricks to be able to do that. Some of it is, for some people, it helps just to write down every single thing that's on their mind and just dump it all on a piece of paper. At least it's not going to be lost. Other people, it's first recognizing that's happening in the moment. I'm stressed out. I've got a lot of things I'm thinking about. This is not, I'm not finding that this is my most important meeting. And yet I know that the people in front of me want me to prioritize this meeting and that I have to show up for them. And knowing how to sort of track how you're feeling, track what's happening, slow yourself down, understand that if you're on any call in front of any person, they're going to want your attention. And how are you going to do that?
Totally agree.
How would a leader appreciate the culture that they've got in the organization and pick up those warning signs that it is a toxic environment? So, how do they do that? And then what would you recommend they do as the first sort of steps, 2 or 3 steps to do something about it?
It reminds me of this one client that I had that was the situation. She contacted me because she was concerned about the culture. And it had been like a really long term issue. So she came in probably 15 years into the slow degradation of the culture. And, what she noticed was people were constantly complaining to her about other people not able to resolve, right, the conflict. They were submitting complaints, EEO complaints, lots of HR actions, right? HR was involved constantly with all of the sort of formal responses, which, unfortunately, they're usually called in when it's later in the process of trying to resolve a conflict. So she was picking up on these things. She was noticing that her team did not work as a team. They worked in silos. They never came to each other. They never worked interdependently with each other. They try to sort of like work around each other. They upstaged wanting to sort of talk about what they were doing, but they never talked about we, this is us. This is what we do. There weren't sort of like a shared, set of goals. And so a lot of what we started working with her on is starting to bring the team together, identify what they probably missed doing, which is having first like a shared set of goals. Why do we meet together? Why do we get together in the first place? What is our purpose? Do we have a set of goals that cannot be addressed without us working interdependently across function? And then what are, some set of operating principles that we need to put in place and hold each other accountable to in order for us to feel really good about trusting each other? There was a lot of trust building, and that takes a very, very long time, depending on how long this has gone on and, how degraded the relationships. And some of it sometimes is like literally dyad work, like two people having an issue that is infiltrating the rest of the team and everyone taking like, it's a faction, like they're on this team or they're on this team. And it's like polarized, like who's right, and sort of trying to break that down. We see that in society all the time, like whose team are you on? And, it's an us versus them mentality instead of a we mentality. And so a lot of the work is moving into how do you get into the we mentality, and can you get there given how bad it's gotten? It's always nice when people catch it really early, and those are some of the signs.
So, it is always about what's right for the business, being united behind a common cause to take the business forward.
Yes.
But what happens, Mira, if the leader doesn't seem to be aware of this, but all the team can feel it and sense it, and the leader's not taking any action?
Yeah.
What can teams do in that situation? That's a really difficult one, I think. How
It
would you
is.
address that?
It is. It is. I had another client that I was working with, and that was his issue. He was such a quiet, incredibly introverted, um, avoidant kind of person. Like he avoided conflict because he wanted everybody to get along. And so instead, his style was like he developed these incredible one-on-one relationships with every single person on his team. But when they got together, they didn't know how to work as a team. And so they still had trouble. For me, the way that it got to me is that his boss was noticing that the team was constantly going around him to his boss, complaining about this or that, or not even complaining about him, but just like a lot of sort of like tension, inner turmoil. I would call these like symptoms, symptoms like complaining about things that aren't about the actual issue, right? So they'd be complaining that they don't get enough work, that they don't feel valued in the work that they do. They don't feel seen in the work that they do. They don't see a pathway to be able to come to high stakes, important meetings. All of these things are symptoms that something is happening where they feel like their issues are going unaddressed by their direct leader. And so his supervisor came to me and said, like, what can you do with this? And a lot of it is working with the leader to recognize when you're working with, for example, high performers who need a whole lot more from you than just direct one-on-one support and relationship. So the thing that is in many of these situations, it's overdoing one of two things that you need on a team. One is focusing on the productivity, the results, the outcomes, what, the team was set up to meet the higher level business goals, right? And the other is having enough of a strong relational aspect to the team that they can work well together. And if you have too much of the productivity and not enough of the relationship, you have people cutting each other off at the knees, competition, but unhealthy competition. No one cares about anybody like sort of working together collaboratively. So they never reach like the highest level goals. If you have too much of the relationship side, you have a lot of sort of stagnation, getting along to get along, artificial harmony kind of stuff, but they're not moving forward. They're just spinning in consensus world. So you need both. And a lot of leaders sometimes miss one or the other or overdo one over the other. And learning how to balance that is probably one of the hardest skills for a lot of leaders to do.
You mentioned that this leader was an introvert and very humble. Do you think that's something that is something all introvert leaders really need to think about? They could be great at developing those one-to-one relationships, but don't feel so comfortable perhaps in a group setting. What do you recommend for introvert leaders, and can introverts be good leaders?
When we're talking about like what do we need more of right now in leadership, I do actually think it would be nice to get more quiet, humble, introverted leadership styles, because we know, at least in the US, we know what's visible. What's visible and what we sort of like lump into leadership is loud, charismatic, boisterous, risk taker, fast talker, quick decision maker. And that is okay in certain circumstances. But when you have a lot of chaos, turmoil, upheaval, uncertainty, you don't need any more of like the push or rah, 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 or we're going to change even more than we have already been through. Sometimes you need somebody who calms the waters, who helps people sort of like slow down, who helps, appreciate that it's important to think a little bit more deeply and, to create a calming environment. And in fact, that's part of what I did when I went to that other center, and it was complete sort of upheaval. What they didn't need is someone to say, we're going to change again, and we're going to, make everything, I'm going to blow everything up and restart all over. That's not what they need. What they needed was someone who was like, okay, we really need to slow things down. I need to understand where people are. I like to spend some time understanding the situation. Let's, figure out a really thoughtful plan. Let's see how we can calm the waters. Right. So that's a lot of what many introverted, humble, or quiet leaders can bring. The problem comes in only when they see tension and turmoil and then they avoid it and they close their doors, or they don't answer the phone and they shut down, or they detach because it's too much. It's too overwhelming. That's the time when they have to sort of like fight their usual instinct and be with the people and be present and still show up. And introverted leaders can do that. Introversion is not shyness. It's not anxiety. It's just having a much lower threshold for the amount of, energy you absorb from people. So it might need fewer, touch points, or in a way that isn't like a large town hall all the time, but instead like smaller focus groups, for example, in order to get some of that work done.
I'm really pleased you've raised this point, Mira, about the difference between introvert and extrovert leadership. And I think it would be good just to define it a little bit further, because I did a post recently about how introverts make brilliant sales leaders. And I had some conversations around the fact that they thought I'd got that wrong. And we need salespeople to be very charismatic and loud and, that have the gift of the gab almost. And that's so not true. So could you just define for us what you think as introvert and extrovert leadership in a way that busts any myths that any of our viewers and listeners might have about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, extroverted people just get a lot of energy by being around people all the time, right? And they like getting into lots and lots of conversations. So their conversations might be a little bit more surface level because they want to have lots of conversations. They want to sort of get energy from lots of people. Introverts, it's just that they don't require that much sort of input from the external world. And they have a much lower threshold by which they are able to take in the energy of other people before they get tired. That's basically, it's just about energy, how much energy you have for lots and lots of people. And the other thing is that introverts have an incredibly large appetite, though, for meaningful conversation. They really don't like small talk. It drives them absolutely crazy. They really like incredibly deep, meaningful conversation. So if you're at a table with an extrovert and an introvert, the extrovert is going to ask you lots and lots of questions, but maybe at the surface level, just wanting to know everything about you and then move on to the next person. The introvert is going to sit with you for 30 minutes and they will find out everything about your life. And it's going to feel like, oh my God, that was like a therapy session. And it's just that that's where they get their energy. Like my husband and I will go to a party and we'll come back and he'll be like, I just found out that like so-and-so, was at this football game and they learned that their friend was at the football game too. And I'll come home and I'll be like, I just found out that so-and-so's child has ADHD and they're getting them therapy. And you're like, you and I were at two different parties. And so we get different things out of the conversations. And going back to your question about, sales, a lot, number one, depends on who you're trying to sell to. Who would appreciate having a much more meaningful conversation, to be heard, to be listened to. A lot of people do. A lot of people really love feeling like they're not being quote unquote sold to with lots of like splashy features and, benefits. But instead that someone said, I heard everything that you said. And my gut is that, this might be right for you and here's why, and then pick out something really unique that they heard. That feels incredibly meaningful. And that's a lot of what introverts can do.
Thank you for that really great explanation. I think that's going to bust some myths.
I hope so.
Would you say that both extroverts and introverts can be great leaders, but they have to understand the areas where they may need to put a little bit of extra attention?
Absolutely both. Every single trait has its upside and downside. And for extroverts, the upside is that they are going to be those leaders who are out and about, connecting with everybody, getting to know people, and, able to easily do a presentation in front of large audiences and things like that. The downside is they're going to have to practice slowing down, being a little quieter in meetings, not taking over meetings as much, being, sort of deeper listeners. How can you be a deeper listener? Introverts, it's the flip. They're going to be great at like those human connections at a deep level, but they might need to practice being on larger stages or having larger calls with, all hands, with everybody in an organization, or networking, which they don't always love, but that it's going to be important for them. So, I think every single characteristic has its upside and downside. Like being humble, for example. A lot of people think if you're humble, you're not confident. That's not true. Humility is really more about being confident that you don't know what you don't know, and you probably should seek it out and you want to learn more, right? And that said, but when you're humble, people are going to perceive you as less confident. And so how do you sort of present as being both confident and interested in learning and growing, right? All of the skills that we talk about with leadership, you have to understand what part of it is bringing your very best and what part of it is your shadow side. If it's going to get in your way.
I love your point about humility and how that's perceived potentially as being less confident. So how does somebody who considers themselves to be a humble leader draw that line from being recognized or being perhaps perceived as not as lacking confidence to going to the other extreme and being considered arrogant? How do they address that balance?
I think this is a very difficult one because this also sometimes interacts with gender and age and race and, other things where we already make assumptions about people, depending on where they are in their career or who they are as people or how they show up in different rooms. So there's like what you can do. And then there's the reality of biases that we, experience in organizations around how people will perceive us regardless of what we try. And we have to sort of like recognize that. But, the way that I think about like humility, for example, is you don't have to put yourself in a one down position. You don't have to say, I don't know as much, so I'm less than, you're better than me because you know more about this. You can still come up and treat people at an equal level. And you happen to have lots of knowledge that I want to have. And I happen to have some knowledge that you might be interested in having. And can we just sort of learn from each other, but without diminishing what we already have accomplished and what are our strengths? The only way to do that is to know yourself well enough, though, to know what those strengths are. And sometimes we overlook our strengths because they're so natural that like when people give us feedback, oh, you're so good at, you're like, oh, whatever. It's so easy. It's natural. We really need to not ignore all of that and really learn how to understand our strengths so that when we have these conversations, we are able to be both confident and demonstrate humility at the same time.
That's a very good point. Thank you for helping with that. That's excellent. Mira, we are coming to a close, and it would be great to hear how our listeners and viewers can get in touch with you and learn more about your 5-step development program, leadership development program.
Yeah. So you can go to www.gotowerscope, GOTOWER, Tower Scope, .com. And you can, look up all of the work that I do in terms of coaching, consulting, group coaching, and things like that. And there is some information about the Tower Scope Leadership Academy there to learn about that. There's also information about my books, Millennials Guide to Workplace Politics, as well as the Workbook Companion.
Thank you, Mira. And I just realized we didn't actually talk about different generations' expectations of leadership.
Right.
So maybe we'll come back and explore that at another time.
That sounds good.
Thank you very much, Mira.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Mira. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Callum. Appreciate it. It was great to talk with both of you, Rebecca and Callum.
Thank you.